Welcome to Race Healer TV. I'm your host, Milagros Phillips, and I'm so excited that you have joined us for this show. This is a very unique show. This show features the dedication, the love, and the great heart that the guests that are on the show have, and their commitment to the healing of racism and to looking at each other as one human family. So I'm honored to have all of these folks on this show who have dedicated their lives, their time, their energy to creating a better world for all of us. Today, we have on the show JC Faulk. And JC is a diversity consultant, and he's also a documentary producer. His program, Circles of Voices, is a program that he has been sharing with the community for quite a few years now. The program, actually, he's had a few thousand people go through that program, not just here in the U.S., but worldwide. You definitely want to take a look at it. You'll want to go on his website and take a look at that program. But JC is also the producer of a documentary film called 400, which is the commemoration of the 400-year anniversary since the first Africans were brought to Jamestown, Virginia. He's a very interesting person, and he's done some amazing work and continues to do amazing work. JC has a master's degree in organizational development from American University, and he uses all his talents to bring together community members, people who by themselves may think that they're different from this other person sitting next to them or their neighbor, and he puts them together, he brings them together to have these amazing conversations. You will definitely want to take a look at his work, but right now we have him as a guest on the show, so you'll be able to hear directly from JC. JC, welcome to the show. We are so excited to have you on the show with us, and I want to start by talking about how you came to Circle of Voices, because that is powerful work that you're doing with the community in Baltimore.
Thank you. Yeah, first, thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate you inviting me to come. And then the Circles of Voices, basically, it came out of, I went through a period of time as a diversity consultant. I've been doing this work for maybe 25 years or so. And I went through a period of time in there where I just thought it was useless to do it. And I got off of the grid for like 2 years and bought a house from the city, worked on my house. Pretty much that was like my full-time thing that I did. When I decided to get back in, I wanted to do something that represented me well, that I felt like would make a difference in the world. So I started doing these workshops at my house, Circles of Voices at my house. 12 people, mostly neighbors, friends, family, that kind of stuff who came. And then I did another one, 16 people came, another one, 20 people came. It got too big for the house, and I pushed it out and created a Facebook page, and 50 people showed up at the next session. The month after Freddie Gray was killed, and 80 people showed up at the session following that. So I knew that something was happening, and it felt like the cart was pulling me, though, on some levels or another, because I didn't expect for it to just blow up so quickly like that. And so since then, I've been just running at it. I decided to, instead of letting it pull me, to get out in front of it. And since 2015, we've had somewhere around 5,000 people in Baltimore and across the country come through Circles of Voices events. It's been amazing. Like, I think the one we just did, that was number 57. It's always free, 3-hour-long workshops. And it's my way of making my contribution to the city changing, for people to get out of their silos and start talking about things that they ignore around, transphobia, homophobia, sexism, racism, gender-based violence, all those things. Because I've been doing this work for so long, I'm pretty good at doing it. And so I figured I would get out in the community and give them some professionally led workshops instead of people having good hearts and going out and doing this work and just destroying it, when they're out there. And I don't blame them for wanting to try, but they just don't have the skill set. Like, after doing this work for 2.5 decades and you 3 decades doing this work, you gain a skill set that most people are not gonna have. So I just wanted to do something to change the city, to change the way people think and feel. And this was my way of making a contribution outside of my workplace work.
It's powerful. I attended just a little bit of your circle, and it was powerful, and people just absolutely loved it. You know, you get to know someone who starts out as a stranger, and you know, very quickly you get to know another person, which is so important for people to understand that, you know, it doesn't take forever. You can get to know someone very deeply, very quickly if the right questions are asked.
Yes.
And that's why that skill set is so important.
Yes.
How did you develop your skill set?
Through trial and error.
There you go. I keep telling people that. You know, they ask me, so they
Yes.
call me Dr. Phillips. I'm like,
Yes.
I'm not a doctor.
Yes.
And they always want to know, where did you study? And
Yes.
it was like life.
Yes, and there's a
Life.
combination of things for me. So there is the trial and error part, but I'm a graduate of the master's program at American University, MSOD program, there, Master of Science in Organization Development.
Right.
So I graduated from that. They gave me some theories to work with, and they gave me some facilitation skills. But I was doing this work before I graduated from the program. So what it did is it enhanced my knowledge of human interaction, is what that program did. And then you still have to go out and tap dance around to find your voice and find your way of expressing it in the world. You know, so lots of us are out here trying to do this work, but I have not run across any other diversity consultant who does it like I do it. And then you'll do it in a different way than I do it, and other people do it in different ways.
Yeah.
So we have to find our own voices in order to be effective out in the world. And you and I can have completely different voices, but it would make sense for you and I to work together if we have those completely different voices, as long as our value set is similar. If we can work around a similar value set, you can have groups that are much more important to you than others. Then we come together, we kind of we build the base up so that we can now talk across those silos and have people doing the work that we've been needing to do for centuries in this country.
Absolutely, for centuries. Good
Yes.
point. And you know, I have a friend that talks about common ground in terms of the roots of the tree meeting up with other roots underneath. And it's the stuff that we have in common as human beings. And then building on that, because the reality is that we've all been poisoned by the same snake.
Yes.
The snake of racism, you know, and people have absorbed it differently based on where they are in the caste system. And I'm always reminding people of that there is a caste system and people are assigned, you know, from your birth and sometimes prior to your birth, where you're going to fall into that caste system. And as a result, you absorbed the racial dynamics differently, but we still have that common ground or our basic humanity. Plus, we're all related anyway,
Yes.
right?
Yes, we are. That's part of what my work is right now. You touched on two things there. One is around the racism piece, and depending upon which identity group you're in, you see racism from a completely different perspective.
Absolutely.
If you're Asian American, you're going to see race from I'm completely invisible perspective. If you're seeing it from the perspective of an African American in this country, we talk about race we talk about race as if the only people who are affected are white
and black
and descendants
Exactly.
of Africa, right?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
so when you move past that and you start adding Asians and you start adding, you know, indigenous people into those conversations, that the angle of race becomes a completely different thing.
Yeah.
So for me, I seeing that in one sense, and then also I started my first 57 circles of voices. My first 10 were all some different angle of looking at race.
Yeah.
Then it dawned on me, you know, that when you said, when you were talking about the impact of it, right? That it dawned on me that we have other isms and phobias that we have to deal with. We have, it's not just racism.
Exactly.
And the same beast that created sexism and homophobia. Oh, I'm going to change the way I said that. Sexism, homophobia, racism, all of those things were created by the same beast. And I decided to expand these workshops to deal with those things. We had a Circles of Voices maybe 6 months ago on transphobia. It was incredible. And I walked into that conversation feeling as ignorant as I've ever felt around being a diversity consultant because I just didn't know enough about the community. Intellectually, I knew some stuff.
Yeah.
But when I got on the ground and started meeting people and feeling them and starting to then empathizing with them as human beings rather than them being in this box called, you know, trans, then it changed me. And so I've decided to jump out now and have workshops on sexism, have workshops on racism, have workshops on transphobia, homophobia, and all of those things, because if we have a world that loses racism, if racism goes away tomorrow, which I have given up on, it's painful to wake up every day thinking that you're going to end racism. We'll move it ahead, but we won't end it in our lifetimes. And so, but for me, if it actually did happen, and homophobia and transphobia and sexism were still left behind, we'd still have a miserable world. So I figured like I wanted to get myself into more than what affected me directly.
Absolutely.
And I want other people to get into what affects me. And I felt like the best way for me to do that was to show them that I'm concerned about their concerns. If I can show them that I'm concerned about what's important to them, then maybe, not always true, but maybe they will come over on my side and do some stuff to help my people have less trauma in the world too.
Yeah. That's so incredibly important. I know I do the same thing in my workshops. We talk about all the various groups and how historical trauma has affected them, and including Europeans who also have historical trauma that they need to heal, and that gets passed down from generation to generation, and we see it in the communities and we see it in the world today in the way that they show up. And so it's extremely important that we take into consideration that, I mean, I hate to say it and people don't like to hear it, but we're all wounded. Hello, this is it, you know. And so we need to, and when we become conscious of that, then we are able to take responsibility for what is my wound, how am I carrying it, how am I affecting the people around me and the people in the world, because I'm still carrying that without being consciously aware that there's some healing that can actually happen, that I can do. We're going to take a short break and we will be right back with JC Faulk. Hello, I'm Milagros Phillips. I'm the facilitator of Race Demystified. For the past 20 plus years, I've been facilitating a program that takes 2 days. It's intense, it's powerful, and it's life transforming. Those who have attended that program simply say they never see race the same way again. It's a program that transforms our views, that gives us a new way of looking at this thing we call race, but also reconnects us. It gives us information that leads to transformation, and it leads to unity. It leaves us empowered, and it leaves us with a sense of knowing that there is something that I can do about this thing we call race and racism. Join us at Race Demystified. To get more information, simply visit my website, www.milagrosphillips.com, and you'll see that the name of my website is below in case you have trouble pronouncing my name. I am so excited to welcome you to that program. It'll forever transform the way that you view race. Welcome back to Race Healer TV. I'm your host, Milagros Phillips, and we are speaking with JC Faulk. And JC is a filmmaker. And right now he's producing a documentary, and I want us to talk about that because that is a really powerful piece of your life right now.
Yes, very powerful. So about a year ago, I set up a production company called Wounded Goose. And Wounded Goose, the entire intent behind Wounded Goose is to bring people's invisible stories to life. You know, like literally when you are in an oppressed group, what the oppressor attempts to do is to suppress everything good about you and to highlight everything that's bad about you. And so it's my intention with the documentaries to highlight some of the better things about the people who have been oppressed over time, and to give balanced stories so we can see people's full humanity rather than just seeing only pieces of it that the oppressor wants us to see. So what I decided to do year and a half ago or so, we had the 500-year anniversary of the transatlantic slave trade was last year. Most of us missed that, even us diversity consultants and people who say they're in this thing, and I think they are in it to make a difference. We totally miss the history of the transatlantic slave trade because we've been reading from and being taught by the larger system to suppress our own stories and to not know our own history. So when I found out about that, it just like really bothered me that first we were missing it, and then the story wasn't being told by any media. I did a search online, and I think I saw 3 different articles that talked about the transatlantic slave trade, not just U.S. articles, but in the entire world. There were only like 3 or 4 different articles written about the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of people enslaved and traumatized over centuries, and we're still being traumatized because it was there and nobody was talking about it. So it just started gnawing at me, and I was just finishing up another film that I was a part of, a co-producer on. I decided to take on this, like, to direct and produce this thing on my own because I needed that story told and I wanted to tell it myself. So jumped in. I have since been to 7 different plantations in America, been to Cape Coast in Ghana, to the slave castles there, and I tell you, I thought I knew a lot about slavery before I started doing this work, and I have been just like bowled over by how much I don't know about the impact and what happened to people during the transatlantic slave trade. That any human being has ever treated any other human being in the way that Africans were treated is deplorable. That people look back and they're proud of their ancestors for building an America on the backs of slaves. It's just deplorable, and that they don't want to look, and apparently we haven't wanted to look either. And lots of the reason why we haven't wanted to look is because it's hard to look at.
Of course.
So I made some decisions along the way with the film. One is I'm not going to show any torn and tattered bodies of Africans in this film. You will see no one hanging from trees. You will see no burning bodies. You will see nothing. Eric Garner, you will not see him being choked out in this movie. You will not see Sandra Bland being, any of that stuff. You won't see any of the horrors that we're conditioned to seeing. It's like America has a fetish with seeing torn and tattered bodies of Black people, and I'm not going to show them. And I can tell this story and have people empathize and understand without doing that. Basically, when you do that, when you tell the story in that way, people kind of shriek away from you.
Because you re-traumatize.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I want my film, I want to be able to have a 4th grader to look at my film and not be traumatized by what they see. And so I've made that decision up with the film, and then I want to also raise up the humanity of Africans and their descendants who are still here in this country. You know, what we've lost track of telling our own stories. We don't tell our own stories. I'm listening to this book right now. I've forgotten the name of it right now, but it's basically, it's about white women's contribution to the transatlantic slave trade and to slavery and to oppression of Black people in America. And it was interesting that in the background, while white men were up in front, out front with the hoods on and all this stuff, the bad end of it, there were a lot of white women in the background changing school books so that our story gets extracted and their story gets changed to be spoken in a brighter light. And it's worse than being called a coon or something, because when you're being called a coon, at least you exist. You extract the stories out of the books, and now you made an entire group of people totally invisible. Yeah. It's worse than being called a name. And this went on for decades in our country, where the stories were being changed and told by someone else. Tell their stories beautifully and don't tell our story at all. So I decided, this medium, like for me, Circles of Voice, is really beautiful. I love doing the work. But, I can do a couple hundred people at a time. Movies, I can hit millions of people with movies. If I tell the story properly, tell the story empathetically, I can hit millions of people at one time by doing that. And I decided to jump into this medium because it's a perfect medium to tell stories. That's how our stories have been told. What was the movie back in the 30s or whatever it was, Birth of a Nation?
Yep.
That movie is still affecting people today.
Yeah.
And so for me, I feel like if we take this medium and we switch it around and tell the story from our own perspective, get it out there in a large enough marketplace, then people will see us in a different light.
That's really powerful, because that whole idea of seeing ourselves and allowing ourselves to be seen in a different light is so compelling and so needed, because, as you said, a lot of the images are so negative and so destructive, and our children are watching that. And by the time someone's 3 years old, they've already formed an identity that's based on some of these very difficult, very dysfunctional views of who we actually are.
Yes, and the beauty of it, we don't have to make anything up.
Exactly.
All we have to do is
The
show just
story's
how
there.
beautiful we are already.
Exactly.
We're already that. We don't have to change. We don't have to be something else. All we got to do is put a spotlight on the beauty that already exists.
Yeah.
So that's for me what I'm trying to do with the work, is to put a spotlight on the beauty that already exists. I leave here, I go to Ghana, and I see you in Ghana. Mm-hmm. You know, I see my people in Ghana. It is incredible, and like if people could actually see and be with us, like be on the ground with us, rather than being with these fictional images of who we are. If they could actually be with us and feel our humanity and see us, I think it would change a lot of people's perspectives about us. When you have someone living in Iowa, for instance, and they're only around white people, and then all they get about us is what's on a TV screen or what's in a movie, I would be scared too.
Yeah.
I would be scared. But when you sit down and you talk to them and you feel them and you touch them and you eat with them, you know, drink with them and play with them and talk about what's important to you, we want the same stuff. But if you never come out of your silo and go into their silo or the other way around, we don't do that work. That's why Circles of Voices, I always have people from different cultural and ethnic backgrounds in that room so we can do that work of getting to know each other outside of what we've heard about the other. You know, we're very different when we're sitting with each other and talking with each other.
Absolutely. Yeah, relationships are important. You know, over time people have said to me, why don't you put some of your work on the internet? And my response is always the same, because segregation only leads to more segregation. And if you're sitting in your own little living room and somebody else is sitting in their own little living room, the interaction isn't happening. We're not having eyeball to eyeball contact. We're not feeling each other's hearts in the same way as if we are in the same room together, where we're sharing that experience together. And those experiences eventually lead to trust.
Yes.
And that's what changes everything. When we can have good, healthy, trusting relationships with one another, it changes everything.
Yes, it does. And like some of the simplest questions, you said something earlier about the questions, depends on the questions. You know, I do this exercise where I have people, I'll have them sit with someone who is somewhat unlike them and have them answer a question like, what happens when we ignore the pain of people in the world? You know, what happens when you ignore pain of people who are around you? And I'll have one person talk and the other one listen, and then I'll flip them around. And they wind up saying the same types of stuff. It doesn't matter whether you're short and, you know, white, or whether you're tall and, you know, a brother from the hood. You say the same things. And because we are so trapped in this ignorant space of that these people in this box all think the same, there's like this huge spectrum. Inside, you look at the African American community, there's a huge spectrum that we live on in there. We don't all think the same or feel the same or act the same. And the same thing with every other group. And when you start sitting down and you start talking to people, you start finding those threads of commonality. I've been struggling a little bit lately calling myself a diversity consultant, because diversity is difference.
Right.
I've been really struggling with that because we are so focused on difference that we fail to tap into those places where that will bring us together.
Absolutely.
I had a Circles of Voices with a guy, Miguel Villar, who is the lead scientist at the Smithsonian for their genealogy program. And I asked him in there, what's the difference between, he's like really light skinned and very, you know, like he's shorter than I am, and he speaks Spanish as a first language. And I'm from here, I speak English as a first language. I'm a
lot of people don't know that Spanish is my first language.
Is it?
Yeah.
I was wondering with Milagros.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. I asked him, I said, Villar, Miguel, tell me, what's the difference between you and I? Scientifically, what's the difference? He said there's about a 1% to 3% difference between us. And that difference is basically our genes telling our body to turn on or turn off genes because of the environment that we live in. Because my ancestors must have lived my closest ancestors lived in a hotter region than yours. So my skin got darker over the course of tens of thousands of years. And he said there's a 1% to 3%. So wait a minute. If there's a 1% to 3% difference between you and I, there's also a 97 to 99% similarity between us.
Absolutely.
Why are we not talking about that?
Absolutely.
Why do we ignore that like it's not important?
Yeah. Very important.
So that's the work that I think we need to start shifting our mindsets around. And it doesn't mean to give up. I don't want to give up my people's experiences. I don't want to forget that we went through this.
Right.
I'm not saying negate that. I'm saying I'm proud that my ancestors went through this crap and that we're still here. I'm proud of that. I'm very, very proud of that. But I don't want to do that at the expense of losing my humanity at the same time, the fullness of my humanity at the same time.
I am so excited that you have come to this program and shared who you are, your work, and all the great things that you're doing in the world. I would like to have you come back and continue this conversation. I am so grateful that you are one of the race healers.
Thank you.
I am so, so happy to have you along this journey with the rest of us.
Thank you.
I am Milagros Phillips, and you have been listening to Race Healer TV. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching this show.